Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Cleo, thank you. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, NOLA Book Fest, my favorite book festival.
I know, right? I mean, you're home right now.
Yeah.
How's that been? Is it special coming here always?
I'm very lucky that I get to come here a lot and that most of my family is here, so we all got to see each other over Mardi Gras. But my Uncle Kenny and my Auntie Anita are here. My mom's here, so her girlfriends, so.
I just met your uncle, which is very sweet.
Hey, Uncle Kenny.
So, Cleo, I think anybody who is a fan of your work, you receive so much from what you do. You give so much. It's so life-giving. Every page of every one of your books, everything you post on Instagram. And first, I just want to start by asking you, with all of the different sort of hats that you wear, and when I was telling people, I get to interview Cleo Wade this week, the reaction from everybody was thrilled, but also people were like, oh, my favorite author, my favorite poet, my favorite content creator, so many different things, my favorite artist. I have so many of her things. I have her dishes from Fish's Eddy.
Oh my God.
That type of thing, where it was like, it was so interesting to hear everybody love so many different things that you do. And so I guess I'm first just wondering kind of what you would call yourself, kind of what the hat that you think you wear that encompasses all those things, poet, author, content creator, artist.
I think I would just probably call myself a maker more than anything. I just like to make things, and what I make things with the most are words. But I mean, beyond that, I think where I find the most purpose in my life is as a friend. And so for me, whether I'm making words that go on a t-shirt or a book or dishes or lip balm or whatever, I try to think of how it can just feel like a really great comforting friend, and a kind of like almost like mini little safety blankets that you can bring with you. And so whether it's the book by your bedside table or something you keep in your bag, to me, I find a lot of purpose in being able to use items to show up as a friend for my readers.
Yeah, and I know with Heart Talk, I mean, it even says in your intro here, I want this book to feel like a friend, to be a companion. What do you hope that looks like for readers at home? Is it that it's, picking it up and opening any page? Like, what does that mean to you?
Well, there's so much loneliness in the world, and I think especially post-pandemic, it's been really hard for people to feel connected to one another or find really kind of thorough and enriching connections and friendships. And so for me, I think anytime, even if it's just one person that you can remind that you're not alone, and you're not the first or the last person to have the feelings you have or the problem you have or the most horrible thing ever that's happened to you has also happened perhaps to somebody else. And that's not to say that our life experiences aren't unique, but it is to say that there's kind of bonds we can find in our unique experiences to comfort and connect us with one another.
I know. I love on your Instagram, I've remembered times when you've posted texts that you've had real conversations with your friends about like a breakup, you know? You will get through this. I mean, those are the kinds of things I think we all need at one point or another in life. I have certainly been there with one of those blindside breakups where you think nothing's ever gonna get better.
Yeah.
What is it like to kind of be that friend without even knowing sometimes who's on the other side?
Well, I think that's why I try to write in a way that's kind of simple, so that it can be easily applied to anyone's life. So, for example, there's a poem in Heart Talk that is called A Love Note to My Body, and I've had people write to me about that, if they're very young and have struggled with issues around food and eating. And I've had someone write to me about using that poem as they went through menopause. And so to me, I try to kind of keep the words and the writing as universal as possible while also making it feel personal and intimate and vulnerable, so that is kind of the entry and on-ramp into the work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, speaking of Heart Talk, this is my favorite page in Heart Talk, this one. It says, "May all your vibes say, I got this." I love that.
Like
By the
that
way,
page
it's like so
too.
hilarious because in looking back in this book, there was one page where I realized I highlighted the whole page. Um, but I love that conversation, especially for women, I think, around confidence. But it's very hard. It's very hard to live that. Talk to me about that and about writing it and what your hope is for somebody to take away and how you have found that the ability to write about it so clearly even.
So on the spread of that book, that page is kind of like, may all of your vibes say I got this, is kind of this mantra that is kind of easy to remember
Yeah.
and kind of just makes you smile a little and just gives you kind of a spark of joy around an important message. And that's balanced out with another message on the opposite page that kind of talks about confidence more in depthly, and that, confidence is not something that we, you don't just kind of, and I think this is especially important for young people and especially young girls to know. It's like, you don't get to the point where you're just pretty enough or smart enough to be confident, or you're validated enough by like the outside world to be confident. It's something that is a working relationship within you that you kind of grow through affirming yourself and being the person who gives yourself permission to be okay with who you are.
Yeah.
And that only happens in kind of micro moments that are repetitive. It doesn't happen in like I publish a book, or you make a New York Times bestseller list, and then you're not just a confident writer. I still like sit in my writing room and I'm like, I'm so scared, and you have to be the one. And I think what is really important is knowing that you have the power to be the person who validates your experiences so that you can go in the world not looking for that from other people. You don't have to everyone is actually so weird that the idea that some things are cool and some things are not, or some people are in or some people are out, is such a construct, and it's so actually silly. Like if you feel like an outsider, you just haven't found your people yet, and just keep looking for your people. And it's okay to notice when someone is not the right type of energy or person for you. And one way you notice that is by if they make you feel bad or good. I know I'm around the people that I belong with when I feel good. And I know that I'm around the people that I don't belong with when I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for people who certainly look at you as like this fount of knowledge on how to best feel that way, to hear you say, I still sit when I'm writing and have this, I'm not always sure of myself.
Yeah.
How helpful do you think that is, us just being honest with each other and sharing experiences like that to find connection in that?
Yeah, I think especially in the world of, in the online world where everything is filtered and everyone kind of focuses on like a highlight, and doesn't really know how, like where their everyday life or everyday actual struggles or these moments, where they belong, because maybe they also don't belong online. Like I think we're still trying to figure out what does and doesn't belong online for our own mental health, because it's hard, because you want to say to someone like, oh, don't just put the best thing about your life on, because then you're living up to this whatever. And then they're like crying on the internet too, and you're kind of like, but is that a place that's going to be able to hold you and give you healing there too? I'm not sure. And so I think that for me, I think we're trying to all figure out what is the best way to be. How do I, make sure that we all get to be as human as possible in every place we go. So whether that's talking to someone in person or whether it's talking to someone online, to me, as long as you're being honest, you're in the right direction.
Yeah. And I think to your point about it starting with yourself, one of the things that I love so much from the page opposite, May All Your Vibes Say I Got This, is this right here. When our mental chatter props us up. Because how often does our mental chatter do exactly the opposite of that?
It will only do that if you ask it to. So our brains tend to, actively select the negative. So that's why you can be walking totally fine all day, and then the one moment you trip in front of people is the only thing you think about for the whole rest of the day. And you're just like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed, you know? And that's just the way our brains work. You know, we don't even think about that. You're like, wow, for the other, 18 hours and 58 minutes that I was like up and walking around, I didn't do one embarrassing thing, but the one embarrassing thing I did, I now am obsessed with for a week.
Right.
And that is how our brains work. And so I think unless you actively interrupt that and step in and advocate for yourself, and I think that one of the greatest boundaries we can ever have is the boundary with ourselves, where we say like, whoa, I'm not gonna be the person who puts me down in a world where like, you may have friends that talk about you behind your back, or you might have trolls on the internet, because I've got those too. And and so there's all these places where like you can't control negativity. So why wouldn't you want to control the negativity within you? Because you actually do have so much control there.
And how much of a practice is that though? Like it's not just like you snap your fingers and you're in it.
Second. So you all day you can just it's hard because a lot of the negative thinking is a spiral, and that's why they call it a spiral on purpose. It's really fast moving, and it all of a sudden you're here and then you're here. And so I think in that you have to kind of have things that help you reset. So whether that's taking a deep breath, whether that's even sometimes like, I had something happen right before I got here that was really jarring for me. And I was like, okay, what do I need to do here? I was like, I'm gonna take a deep breath. I'm going to know, is there resolution here right now or is there not? There isn't. But how can I comfort myself? And I was like, you know what? I actually even need a little bit of help. So when I gave myself a minute, I called a really close friend and I was like, I've got this thing that just happened and it's a really weird situation and it's right before I'm just trying to go to work and do my job. And so you're kind of like, I got that help. And then I also find honesty with myself that I could talk about it even in front of a room full of people that I don't know, and children. So.
No, but I think it's actually interesting that you bring that up because I might know what you're talking about from following you on Instagram and having seen you post about something that had happened to you. How do you decide in sharing something like that? Because it's hard when you're feeling bad to let other people know you're feeling bad.
Well, I hate to say it, but it was a second thing. So yes, I did. So yes, I did have this very strange thing happen to me a couple of days ago, and it did kind of take a lot of energy to speak up about it. And I think that if you're not afraid to, which I don't necessarily have to do in this situation, but you can always use your voice and even I actually thought about this in what I was dealing with before I came here, which is that is what I'm saying kind? Is what I'm saying honest? Is what I'm saying a reflection of all of the information I have? And if you can speak and say that all of those three things are present, then I think you can say what you want to say. But I think a lot of the time, because of the information you might have, you're really upset and you're going to be unkind. Or because you don't have enough of the information, maybe it doesn't give you the best space to find the real honesty of the situation. Or maybe it's triggered something in you that you're really upset about that maybe doesn't even have anything to do with this. And so I think about that, whether it's writing something online or whether before I was here about to write a text message to a family member. Do you know what I mean? Where you're kind of like, you know what, do I have all the information? Is this kind? Is this honest? And if I don't feel that the situation and maybe the dramatics of it have melted to that space, I just don't move forward, and I'm, okay to stand still to recalibrate.
Yeah. The other thing that you talked about, and honestly, really genuinely from reading your work has helped me be better at this, that I think is actually a solve for more than we give it credit for, is gratitude. How important do you think a practice gratitude is in finding peace, I guess, in a lot of situations?
I think a lot of the times people think gratitude is kind of, gratitude is a very spiritual practice. in the sense of, like, I think a lot of the times people think that gratitude is this way that we don't recognize our problems, or ignore our problems, or like, kind of don't acknowledge that there's, for every sunny side of the street, there's like a shadowed side of the street that's cold and scary. And I think that for me, gratitude is this kind of living thank you. And it's an energy where, when it's applied to just how you completely and utterly move through the world, you're able to just kind of persevere. So like it's actually even a resiliency strategy. And there's also, I think, especially in the times we're living in, it's such a struggle to feel like anything's enough. And so gratitude also just kind of brings calmness to yourself to be like, you know what, like maybe I don't look like her, or maybe I don't have as much money as her, or maybe I'm not this, or maybe I'm not that, but I am me, and like what am I thankful for, and what are these thank yous I have? And I think that energy in and of itself is something that attracts incredible abundance and incredible joy, and it's honestly just an amazing kind of energy to even be around. And I think that for me, I have so many amazing relationships in my life, and I can honestly say that so much of it is based on gratitude. I'm grateful of the time I get to spend with someone. I'm grateful that they listened. Like even today when I called a friend to ask if I could talk to her about something for 10 minutes, like afterwards I said, thank you for listening. Like, because it's such a privilege to have a listener in a world where so many of us don't even, really struggle to even say what is weighing down on us. And so, I think for me, gratitude is everything. And we all have these different practices around it because of maybe our upbringing. I think because for me, I didn't grow up with a lot, and I come from this really kind of joyful lineage where like doesn't have to be a lot of fancy things in the room, but even if there's one good song in the room, that kind of changes everything. And I think to have lived with that, it's a lot easier to be like, oh, but like, you know what, I'm thankful for this, like, Casanova by Rebirth Brass Band song, because you can put it on and feel better.
Yeah, which also, another thing that you've helped me with is that living in the moment. If you're missing this moment,
yeah,
what is life if you're not living in it? But that's
Yeah.
another thing that has to be practiced.
Yeah, and it's hard because we're nervous, so
Yeah.
when you're nervous, you're kind of, anxiety is this kind of obsession with what's going to happen next.
Yes.
And depression tends to be this obsession with what has happened. And in the present moment, you can kind of just be in what's happening without having to kind of have this, narration or conclusion. And I think that especially in our lives where, we're obsessed with putting like a period or an exclamation point on everything and every feeling and every situation. And presence is this idea that we are just in it, and we don't have to tie it into a bow, and we don't have to put it into a corner or categorize it, or, we don't have to kind of turn it into something.
Yeah.
We can just let it be what it is and feel what we're feeling. And in there, if you can do that, and if you can kind of talk yourself into doing it in the moment, there's peace to be found in that, because like that is what everything else that's bigger than you is doing. Like these oak trees are not thinking about the next hurricane. They just aren't. They're just here.
Yeah. How much do you think that can benefit your life if you really try to actively do that and, like you said, not either be focused and obsessive about the past or anxious about the future?
Well, I know for me, it's what's helped when I struggle with anxiety. And so if I have a moment of high anxiety, I know that grounding myself in the present moment is what helps.
Yeah.
So it's actually the one thing that helps. It's the only thing that helps. And so even knowing that in what is like a micro moment of my life, to know that like, oh, okay, I'm freaking out.
Yeah.
And like first like let me breathe, and then let me just like be here, and then let me listen to this or that. I can, then just be. And I find okayness in that.
Yeah. Especially like if you're scrolling on Instagram and something new of yours comes up, or like how I feel about how may all your vibes say I got this, and how you said you want it to be kind of like this easy to remember mantra. When I'm scrolling and there's something new from you, and it's one of the way you've written something in the beautiful art way that you do, like sometimes I'm like, whoa, that's the best thing I've ever read, or like, whoa, that was groundbreaking.
Oh my God.
Do you feel like that though when you're writing it? Like sometimes when you write it, are you like, whoa, that was like a strike of lightning? Like what's your process like to create these gems?
Well, I wouldn't write something that I haven't used or I haven't said to a friend at a time in need. So I just, like, I think where people, I think in writing, whenever anything gets tough, is if you're not starting by writing for the things you know best. So I know myself very well, and I know my friends very well. And so I think for me, I start by writing what I know well, and then you see just how universal that is. And so if I'm writing something, like I think sometimes as a writer, you start to think like, that sounds cool, or that sounds smart, or that sounds funny, or that sounds interesting, or that's a good line. And you can even see that when you read like celebrity interviews. Sometimes they'll have like a random thing that they like keep saying, and you're just like, who like just validated that in a room and told you it was like the funniest thing they'd ever heard, and so now it like can't stop being your joke, you know, because it really turns you into this kind of like robot of being like, okay, someone said that was okay, so I'm gonna keep doing it, you know. Whereas like to me, it's, you know, I would never want to kind of turn into like a version of myself, or like a kind of like kind of miming who I am, which is why like I never read interview questions before, or I, you know, because if I get to use words for a living, like I'm gonna just go to work and do my job and use words without thinking like, oh, I've got to have this canned thing I have to say because that will be a hit with the crowd. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm not like a stand-up. So, but it's, you know, so I think for me, I'm always thinking about like, wow, this, you know, I've written my mantra for anxiety and shared it, you know? And so I'm like, but that is actually what I say to myself. Like, I remember the plane ride I was on where I really needed it, and I said it, and it helped me so much that I wrote it down, and then I took a photo of it and I shared it. Yeah. You know, and so I think that.
Which one are you talking about?
It's, this feeling is not me, it is moving through me. And so, you know, because I think a lot of the time we think that we are the worst thing that's happened to us or is happening to us in the moment. And so it's really hard to release something that is actually just trying to work its way out. And so, you know, because I think I have a, you know, practice of saying like, this is what's true and real for me, and maybe it'll work for you. And I think for me, my goal is always like, listen, even if it helps one person, that's enough. You know, even if you can, like, if it's one person, it's enough. And so I think because I also write with that kind of mode, you know, I think that's what makes it, I guess, authentic, because I'm not trying to think like, ooh, you know, this is like a marketing concept, so it will like work across this like huge thing. I'm like, you know what? Like when my friend called me about like her divorce after 20 years, like I remember saying this, and she said, I'm gonna write that down. And I was like, you know what? Me too. So, you know, so that's.
Well, it's also just, you know, I think especially in the context of being here at a book festival and hearing from authors and hearing process types of things, it's very nice to hear as someone who consumes your content. It's not like, okay, tomorrow I have 1 hour where I'm gonna go sit at my desk and write because I need to write new things. It's like you really are feeling something that even helps yourself, and that's when these things come out.
Yeah, and you know, I will say that though with every craft, I think there's two things that are important, which is that you do live it and breathe it, so that you're open to hearing something, experiencing something that you can then kind of synthesize into something that could be helpful to you or someone else. And then you also build in a discipline around the work. I mean, I think, you know, nothing that is like more than 2 pages gets done without you blocking off the time and sitting down and doing it.
Yeah. Which leads me to my next question about going from poems and the art you had been creating to books, 3 of them now.
Yeah.
What was that jump like?
You know, it was pretty natural, because I'd say that, you know, Heart Talk was it's interesting because I just finished writing my next book, and I've been thinking a lot about the difference of the process between now and when I wrote my first book. And it was actually pretty similar in that in Heart Talk, it was in my 20s, I was kind of collecting all of these things that I felt the people around me were talking about and I was talking about. And so it felt like this kind of collection of life in that moment, in that time, even in that time in our history, it coming out kind of like right before the election. And then as I was writing this book, I was like, wow, this is similar. So like, I wouldn't say that the book has anything to do with the pandemic. Like that word doesn't like appear throughout the book, but you know, when I am observing or I am in community with my friends or my readers, I'm like, wow, this is like, I'm being asked this one question over and over and over again. So for example, in my next book, there's an entire section that is just about heartbreak. Because I was like, that's the one thing I get asked the most. It's the one thing people like, and it's just about relationships.
I mean, Cleo, when we have our hearts broken, you are who we turn to.
Oh my God.
Your words. So that's great to hear. Okay, so you have another book coming out.
I do. I have a book coming out in October.
Very
I'm very excited.
I bet. And also, something else that I loved, I've read before that one of the kind of potential names for Heart Talk for your first book, you kind of like tapped into this idea of like a book for people who don't think they like poetry or didn't know that they did.
Yeah.
I mean, how incredible has that been? Because really, I think you're one of very few, if not the only, for many people I know, I think we're around the same age, who would be like, oh yeah, that's a poet that I love. That's a poet that I follow. What's up? I mean, you've totally introduced it to a generation, I feel like.
Well, when I was writing Heart Talk, there wasn't like a poetry, like kind of this resurgence of poetry in pop culture. So I'd say that I write more for mass, for pop. That's like what I enjoy because I really kind of like writing in a very wide and universal way because again, like to me, I write more to be like a friend, and I think that like I could be a good friend to anybody. And so that's kind of where I create or make from. But at the time, you know, when Heart Talk was coming out, people didn't, you know, there hadn't been this kind of huge resurgence. Like now there's you know, I think you could talk to a 13-year-old and they would say like, I really like this poet, or I follow someone online who just for their writing. And it wasn't really like that, you know, 7 years ago. And so I almost also called it like a book for people who don't like to read. Like, cause it was like, it's such a, like, if you do feel that you're so stressed and you can't like read for pleasure, which I'd hear people say a lot because they were either kind of like lost in the scroll on their phone, or they were, you know, just stressed by like everyday life and the fact that like most people's work is constantly streaming it on their phone. So it's really hard to have that boundaried, I leave the office at 5 p.m. that we've historically had because your email comes in all throughout the hours, and it's really hard for people to understand that like, you know, just because a text comes in, you don't have to respond in that moment. And that's really, I think, hard for us. And so I think there's a lot of fatigue there in things that, you know, typically or, you know, historically gave us pleasure and joy, like reading. And so I was also, when I wrote it, I intentionally wrote a book that you could pick up at any page and just read one page or read it front to back.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you say that this new book has this whole dedication on heartbreak. Some of the stuff in here, too, in Heart Talk even, talks about kind of like, it feels like you're broken into these pieces, and it's finding somebody else's pieces that kind of fills it. It doesn't just get unbroken. But is there anything new in the heartbreak realm that you're going to really like move us with? I mean, the whole thing will, but anything that's different than something that we've seen?
You know, I think that what I really talked a lot about was kind of like cultivating the bravery around leaving spaces that aren't for you. And so I think, and that like when you have a boundaried life, the only people you'll upset are the people who like benefited from you not having boundaries. And so I think a lot of it is, you know, I write a lot about how we, you know, like I write about one of the first relationships I ever left where I still really loved and really liked the person, but I wanted the life I wanted more than I wanted to be with them.
Wow, yeah.
And so I write that I kind of remember sitting at this like really fun jazz bar in New York, and I was with all of my girlfriends, and we're kind of like up late at night, and we're having whiskey, and we're having French fries, and we're laughing, and we're having the best time, and the person I really liked was like, I say like fully cringe, like someone I was like dating but never took me on a date. I would just like go over to his house.
Okay.
And I was
Okay.
like, I actually want someone who wants to be in the world, because I so enjoy being in community, and I couldn't be someone who had to kind of divide my life between absolutely zero community and then have to escape to find community. I needed it to be integrated, and I realized it then. And so this idea that we choose, like choosing the life you want is often more important than the person you might want. And that helps you to kind of move away when you're trying to have, something bigger or more than how you feel about one person.
But that's scary, because
Very
then
scary.
in your head is, what if there's not another person?
Right. But there's probably there is another person. And there's the person who will also give you, I think, when you have this kind of mindset of like, these are the things I want, and these are like all the ways in which I'm willing to receive it, you will find that person. But a lot of the times we are so obsessed with putting a face on what we're asking for that we're not like, oh, I just want someone who like loves me and listens to me and is good to me. We're like, no, I want Bill. And you're like, okay, but like Bill, like, isn't calling you back. And so I think a lot of it too is to be like, listen, like, maybe right now it could be the person I have these feelings for. But if they're not giving me what I need, maybe I actually need to just open it up and say like, whoever it is, and whatever it's gonna look like. Or, I had a friend who said to me, like, recently she called me, and she was having to kind of go through getting a mastectomy and hysterectomy because they found some, genetic precancerous things. And she was like, she's like, and I just don't know, do I try to have another baby right now, or do I, because I really want a big family, and she's like, and we feel so lucky to have the kid we have. And I was like, well, there's no wrong or right way to do this, but what I will say is what you're saying, you just want a big family? And she's like, yes. And I was like, so what's all of the ways that, because I was like, you just also told me that your sister and her kids moved next door. So like, does the feeling of a big family like come from not having that gate that divides your property, and all of your kids kind of grow up together in this one big yard? And there's more dogs, and there's adoption, and there's kids from the local like girls center who come over every Sunday for dinner at your house. Like, there's so many ways to feel family and to feel that you have this really big family. And so I just said to her, I was like, as you're making the decision, what I would ask you to do is just not narrow it to the only way I have a big family is if I have one more child or have a child, period. Do you know?
Yeah. Wow. That just hit. That was really, really incredible. And it makes me just, hearing you say you have that conversation with this friend. I mean, I think it's obvious to anybody who is a fan of yours how lucky your friends are, to have this as an ongoing communication, a back and forth. But I also love how much people who consume your work benefit from that as if they are your friend, and how you write that you want this book to be a friend. And I read that you said once, I think, that part of almost what makes you want to write books is to go on tour with them so that you can go and be
I
with
love
people.
going on tour.
And so tell me about that and the community that you've created, but what that is like when you meet people and they instantly connect with you as they want to hear from you. They tell you more maybe than some of their friends know.
I get to experience that a lot on tour and a lot through my Are You OK booths, which I usually set up here, but I couldn't do it this year. But, for me, I feel so lucky. I mean, I really do write these books so that people feel that they have a companion in those moments. And I've made a lot of friends on my tours, and even the friend I'm talking about is someone I met who reached out to me through my work, and that's how we know each other. We didn't like meet at a cocktail party.
Yeah.
I think we met on my tour stop in New York. And so I think that, for me, I just feel lucky that what I hope to do with and for my community, I'm able to do, because it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes you're like, you're really wanting to give and do, but it's not landing, or it's not, or it's not quite the right energy that someone needs. And we all know what that's like too, where you're just like, I made the whole dinner, and you're like, okay, but you were a nightmare the whole time, so like it's not fun to eat it, So I get that, but I think for me, I just feel so lucky that, because as you're writing the book, it's really scary. It's so, and I'm feeling this so much with my next book. You're so like you go through every feeling of like, who cares about the next book? Who cares about, does it still, is it still helpful? Will it help? Like, and as you're, and to kind of even stay focused, to be able to get over the humps when you're having a hard day writing, and you're like, does the world need another book of yours? Or does, all of these things, and you're kind of like, what? I feel so lucky that those moments with the people that do read my books, like, help me to kind of keep going forward, because you're like, okay, I remember when I like met with those like 3 girls last year at this book festival, and I was like, I'm gonna write a chapter on heartbreak, and I was like, I'm gonna keep my promise to them. So like, that's what helps me to kind of, I am so kind of fueled by my readers, so that's why I'm especially grateful.
And it's interesting to hear that. Oh, by the way, if anybody has an audience question, I'll take those in the next few minutes. If you want to just head on over to this mic, and I'll do that right after this next question. Hearing that it fuels you is really so special too, because sometimes that can deplete people. Like, to give a lot of yourself can be hard. But for you, it fuels you, and it's even, like you just said, you made a promise, and it's like fueling your work as well.
Yeah, and you find a balance. So you find, like in anything, if you kind of know you're going to give a lot of energy, you can also create spaces where you can replenish a lot of energy. And I'm thinking about that a lot now as I prepare to go on tour again in the fall, because I'm like, wow, like I used to go home and like kind of replenish all of my energy, and now I have 2 small children, and so like that's like the opposite of what happens unless you lock yourself in the pantry, and so, which I do once a day, but so now I'm trying to figure out, I'm like, wow, what is it, and then you find it in unexpected ways, because I used to like be like, oh, another flight, and now I'm like, ooh, a flight. No service, no children, like, and so even the 3, like what would have been like, 5 years ago or 4 years ago when I was touring and on the road constantly, I would have been like, oh, an airplane for 3.5 hours. I'm like, an airplane for 3.5 hours, and it's so great. And so you're kind of, you find it in these different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It's very funny. Hi, you could probably, we might be able to hear you from here, or there's a microphone you could walk to too if you want. Oh my goodness.
Whoop, whoop, this is awesome.
Come on over.
It's really hard to be the first person to ever ask a question.
It is. You're very brave. Oh, right here, there's one too. Right there.
You guys are cool.
What's your name? Tell us your name before you ask your question, if you don't mind.
Hi, my name's Annie.
Hey, Annie.
How many books did you publish?
4.
Oh, cool.
I have, should I sell you my books right now? So I've got one book called Heart Talk, and I've got another book called Where to Begin, and I've got a Heart Talk journal and a children's book called What the Road Said.
Cool. I have another question.
Okay.
What inspired you to write?
When I was your age, I went to a poetry summer camp. And do y'all know the school Country Day? Where do y'all go to school?
We go to school at Evinola.
Where is that?
That's like magazine. It's a French school.
I grew up here and I went to summer camp at Country Day, and I had a poetry teacher, and I asked her, how do you write a poem? And she said, you think of the one thing you've never seen before in your life, and you write about that. And so she said, think of a bird in every color you've ever seen a bird in, and now write about a bird in the one color you've never seen it in.
Oh.
And it was the first time I realized that you could just take anything out of your imagination and make something, and it was always right and perfect, because in poetry, people might tell you that there's a wrong way to do it, but there really isn't.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
thanks, Annie.
Hello. Oh,
Hi. What's your name? I love your sweatshirt.
Thank you. My name is Jack.
Hey, Jack.
My question is, how long have you been making books?
10 years. Thank you for your question, Jack.
Hello,
Hi.
my name is Jason, and my question
Hey, Jason.
is, how many hardships have you had, and how did you overcome them?
Oh, wow.
Good one. I have had countless, and hardships come in all sizes. So you have some daily ones that might seem kind of small, and then you have some really big ones that take a really long time to kind of move through, get over, or accept. And I'd say that even though you didn't ask me my advice for moving through hardship, I'd say that you can kind of keep going, and and remember that you have the power to say, I'm okay.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thanks, Jack. Hi. What's your name?
Pierre.
Hey, Pierre.
What inspires you to make books?
People in their lives.
Nice.
Thanks.
Hi, my name's Amelia.
Hey, Amelia.
I have a question.
Okay. I'm down.
What is the best book you've written, and how did you do it?
Well, in my opinion, the best book I've written is the one I just wrote. In everyone else's opinion, I'd say they probably think Heart Talk or What the Road Said. Where It Begins, it's good, but it's not as good as those.
That's not true.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sydney.
Hi, Sydney.
Besides your books, what is your favorite thing to read?
Oh.
Gosh, I really, really, really love reading Toni Morrison's books. And I love Shel Silverstein. And I have a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. And so I read a lot of children's books. And so I really like reading those. I love this book called The Undefeated. And I like Dr. Seuss. And the only thing I don't read a lot, I don't read a ton of fiction. I read a lot of Audre Lorde is another reader I really like. Lucille Clifton, Mary Oliver.
Okay.
Okay.
We probably have time for one more question if you guys
Well, should we
wanna
just do the last 3?
pull up. Yeah, is that okay?
We'll just do it. We'll
Okay.
just do the last 3. I hope everyone who asks a question gets extra credit.
Hi, my name is Benjamin.
Hi,
and,
Benjamin.
How do you get over when you don't know what to write about? What do you do?
Like when you have writer's block?
Yeah.
Whenever I feel like I don't know what to write, I usually take it as a sign that I should be listening. So I go into a room with friends and I ask them questions and I listen to others, or I read something, or I take in information rather than thinking that I always need to be pushing out information.
That's good.
Hi, my name is Emma.
Hi, Emma.
What's the easiest book you've ever written?
They're all so hard. Every single one. I think the easiest book is probably Where to Begin, because it's a book that we took my TED Talk and we turned it into a book, so it was basically already written.
Hi, I'm Beatrice.
Hi, Beatrice, our last question.
I was wondering if you had a book on coping with a parent's divorce.
Are you going through that?
now, but kind of.
Yeah, I went through that. It's really hard. I don't, but I'll write you one day, I promise.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your questions. Cleo, thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Thank you, guys.
And
Thank
you're
you so much.
Thank you for.